the most expensive area. We leased the house for me. I already had the little Mercedes convertible, the Rolex watch, all the things that the world called a status symbol. I had all those things. Moved into this neighborhood, and the people thought I was just another wealthy businessman. They had no idea who or what I was. Every other week, I'd bring an electronic expert in to check the phone to see if it was tapped, to check the house to see if it was bugged, and I knew whenever I drove someplace, looking in the rearview mirrors, I never saw any police surveillance on me. And I finally found that freedom that Paul Castellano had told me about, but even though I found that freedom, I still had a void in my life, and I still didn't know what it was. 11.5 months went by. I managed to open up 10 restaurants and was negotiating with a large company to buy the entire restaurant chain for millions and millions of dollars. It was a Friday night. We were one of the larger restaurants, and the owner came to me and said, "Tom, I just received a phone call. An elderly family member died a few days ago, and tonight is the last night I can attend the funeral." And I told him, "You don't need me to go to the funeral with you." I said, "You go by yourself. Don't worry, nobody's going to bother you." I didn't tell him the real reason I wouldn't go to a funeral. The real reason being, at funeral, people cry. And here I was a couple of weeks away from my 40th birthday, and the last time I cried, I was a little 10-year-old boy. It was almost 30 years. And to me, if people cried, that meant they were weak. And I was this big, tough guy, and I didn't want to be around weak people, so I had never gone to any funerals. Plus, when I did see people cry, it reminded me when I was a little boy. And that's the last thing I wanted to be reminded of the beatings I got from my father. So I had never gone to funerals. While he was gone, a man came in the restaurant looking for him, and my instructions were, if anybody looks for him, you send them to me first. When this man approached me, the minute I laid eyes on him, there was something I didn't like about him. He came up and asked me where the restaurant owner was. I told him it was none of his business, and I asked what he wanted with him. And he said he owes me money. I knew he wasn't one of our suppliers, but I just wanted this man out of my face and out of the restaurant. And I said, "All right, how much money does he owe you?" And he said $800, and I reached in my pocket to get the 800 and started to hand it to him. And I said, "What does he owe you $800 for?" And he said, "Cocaine. Every day he buys 8 grams of cocaine and pays me the next day." When I heard that, I put the $800 back in my pocket. I reached in and I got my gun, and I shoved my gun right in his mouth. And I told him, "If I ever see you in this restaurant again, or even on the streets outside," I said, "I'll blow your brains out, and you think I won't, just nod your head and I'll do it right now." And he turned around, he ran out of the restaurant. I was very angry because here I thought I was protecting the restaurant owner's life when he actually put my life in worse danger than his was. I was with this man 16, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. If we ever would have been stopped and this cocaine was found, both of us would have been arrested on drug charges. And all Paul Castellano would have to do is see it in the newspaper or see it on television that I was arrested on drug charges. They said there'd be no explanation, no second chances. I would be killed. So I was very angry that the restaurant owner put my life in this position. When he finally came back from the funeral, the minute he stepped in the door, I ran over and grabbed him, and I began hitting him. And I left him laying on the ground in a pool of his own blood. And I just grabbed him by the throat, and I told him, "I'm coming back Monday morning. And if you don't sign this entire restaurant over to me," I said, "I'll finish what I started tonight." I left the restaurant, got in my car, drove home, took a shower, got myself a good night's sleep. Saturday morning when I woke up, for some strange reason, I didn't go through my usual routine. I just sat at the very edge of the bed, and I started taking a mental inventory. I started looking at the Mercedes parked in the driveway, this fancy house with the fancy furniture and all the gold and diamond jewelry I had and all the money I had laying around the house. And I thought to myself, my father worked 2 and even 3 jobs and never had anything to show for it. And I've never really worked one day in my life, and look at all that I have. And everything I have, I've got it all myself. Nobody's ever given me anything. As I sat there looking at these things, having all these thoughts, something happened in my life that was the very beginning of my life changing completely around. As I sat there with these thoughts, and a small, still voice began to speak to my heart. And it wasn't a voice that you could hear with your ears. There was no thunder. There was no lightning. And Charlton Heston didn't speak. This was a small, still voice that speaks to your heart. And this voice said, "Yes, Tom, look at all these things. All the things you see here, they're all yours, and you've done it all yourself. But Tom, you have no idea where this life of yours is leading you. Tom, you're headed straight to hell." For the first time in my life, I trembled with fear. I knew this was the voice of God. Being raised a Roman Catholic, I made my own personal decision only to attend church on Christmas and Easter Sunday. I knew absolutely nothing about God other than what I saw in a movie when I was just a little kid called The Ten Commandments. And there was two things that I remembered most about that movie. One was when Pharaoh wouldn't let God's people go, God parted the Red Sea, led his people through safely, and when Pharaoh's army tried to follow them, God closed the Red Sea and drowned and killed all of Pharaoh's army. When Sodom and Gomorrah wouldn't turn from their wicked ways, God destroyed all of Sodom and Gomorrah. So I looked at my Father in heaven no different than I looked at my Father on earth. If you did something wrong, you were going to get punished. And I knew God wasn't going to step off his throne and come out of heaven to come down to earth and beat me with a leather strap like my father did. And I thought God was saying, you've lived such an evil and such a bad life. I'm killing you and sending you to hell. And I trembled with fear. But then I started looking at the house, the Mercedes and the Rolex and all the other gold and diamond jewelry and all the cash I had around, and a spirit of pride came in. And that spirit of pride just chased that spirit of fear right out of the house. And although I didn't see any bright lights or any angels or any of those things, I just boldly began speaking out loud. And I said, God, where were you when I was a little boy? I said, God, you're supposed to know everything. Then you know the prayer that I prayed every night as a little boy. And that prayer was, God, when my father comes home from work tonight, God, please don't let him get drunk and beat me. God, please just let him walk in my room and let him put his arms around me and say, son, I love you. And I said, God, I told you I'd even settle if he just came in the room and put his arms around me and called me son. I said, but God, you never answered that prayer, because every single night he came home and got drunk and beat me. I said, God, that's when I really needed you. And I said, you were nowhere to be found. That's when I was weak. That's when I was poor. I said, God, look at me now. I'm not weak and I'm not poor. And I got even bolder, and I said, how dare you come into my life now? And I said, and threaten to kill me. Who do you think you are? I said, God, you yourself just spoke to me and said, everything I've done myself. Well, if this is my time to die, I said, I'll do that myself too. I reached in the nightstand, I took out a .357 Magnum, put it to my head. And I said, God, I'm going to take my life and show that I don't need you for anything. Plus, I'm going to show you that I'm more powerful than you are. You can't stop me what I'm about to do. Before I had a chance to pull the trigger, the telephone rang. And I picked it up to get it out of the way. And on the other end of the line was a man who had seen me in the restaurants. He was originally from New York, and he was just a legitimate salesman. But every time he saw me or called me, he would invite me to his house to have dinner. He said his wife cooked the best Italian food in all of Atlanta. And every time he would call me, I'd give him the same answer, I'll call you back. And I never had any intentions of calling him back. And here he was calling me. I had the gun in one hand ready to take my life, and I had the telephone in the other hand with a dinner invitation. Now that's what you would really call the Last Supper. And before I can give him my answer, he said, wait a minute. He said, it's different. Tomorrow's Sunday. He said, I know being Italian, you're probably Roman Catholic, but my wife and I want to invite you to our church tomorrow, and it's not a Roman Catholic church, it's a non-denominational church. Back in those days, that word had way too many syllables for me to even understand. But I gave him my usual answer, I'll call you back, and I hung up the phone. I thought for a few minutes, and I took the gun, and I laid the gun down. I said, God, you totally underestimate me. I said, I've been trained by the very best. No one has ever been able to con me. And I said, God, that includes you. And I said, I could read between the lines and see what you're trying to do here. I said, if you kill me right now in this house and they find my body a day or a week from now, nobody will ever know that it was you that killed me. They think I had a stroke or a heart attack. So you're trying to con me into going into this non-denominational church. So when I get there, you can kill me in front of all those people so you could show them what happens to people like me who live a lifestyle like I do. I said, God, I told you I don't fear you. I'm not afraid of you. I said, I'll go to that church and you can't touch one hair on my head. I called this man back who invited me. I think he had a mild stroke or a heart attack when I accepted his invitation. He told me what time the services started, gave me directions how to get there. When I hung up the phone, I had called somebody to come by, wash and wax and detail the Mercedes, and dip my jewelry in the jewelry cleaner so it would be sparkling, and went through all my closets picking out my most expensive clothing. Sunday morning, I got the directions and I headed towards the church. I looked at the directions and I had to make a turn into a driveway, and turned into a driveway and went down a small little hill. And I came upon a type of building that I had never seen before. I didn't know what it was then. I know very well what it is now.